Chris was sent home past midnight after a loss to the Heat. He posted on IG that he'd been kicked off the very team that will one day retire his jersey. That sent social media into panic mode. What happened? What did he do? What did they do?
Chris Paul got sent home by the Clippers past midnight after a loss, and the internet went absolutely crazy trying to figure out what happened. Now we finally have all the details, and it's way worse than anyone thought. From a Halloween party where only 3 people showed up to confrontations on the team plane, this saga explains exactly why CP3's Clippers reunion ended in disaster. Before we break down every awkward, uncomfortable detail of how this situation completely fell apart, I need to know, do you think Chris Paul was trying to help the team, or was he just being insufferable? Drop your honest take in the comments because this story has layers.
Chris signed a 1-year, $3.6 million vet minimum this summer. The team envisioned his role as an end-of-the-bench veteran leader that they needed, low maintenance. Kawhi and James Harden are the exact opposite. I mean, they're talented and respected, but not too big on vocal leadership. But several players were concerned about CP taking their minutes.
All right, let's get into exactly what happened between Chris Paul and the Los Angeles Clippers, because the full story just came out thanks to ESPN's Ramona Shelburne, and it is absolutely wild. This isn't just about one incident. This is about months of tension building until everything exploded on a team plane across the country. Chris Paul signed a 1-year, $3.6 million veteran minimum deal with the Clippers this past summer, the team that drafted him, the team that will eventually retire his jersey. It was supposed to be a feel-good reunion where CP3 could mentor young players and provide veteran leadership off the bench. That's not what happened. Not even close.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the Clippers saying they want to do right by Chris Paul?
I don't know what that means.
That's
What is it? I hear the words, you want to do right by him, and by him was him finishing his season like a true Hall of Fame player. So you stop that. You can't cut him. So that means you just told him to stay home, in a sense. Just stay home, we don't want you around here. And
told him to Zoom.
it told him 2020.
Zoom call him through the
work remotely. Send in your hours.
Like you're saying anything that makes sense to the world, but in reality, you're telling the man to stay home so he's not around the team, and then you will find a trade for him.
The Clippers envisioned Chris's role as an end-of-the-bench veteran leader. Low maintenance, quiet, supportive. Just be there when needed, offer advice when asked, and mostly stay out of the way because the team already has its stars in Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. Now, here's where the Clippers made their first massive mistake. They signed Chris Paul, one of the most competitive, intense, detail-oriented players in NBA history, and thought he'd just sit quietly on the bench and be content with a minimal role.
ESPN's Ramona Shelburne dropped an article Tuesday shedding more insight into the factors that led to Paul's abrupt divorce from the team. So according to her report, CP3 was told he was expected to be an end-of-bench veteran leader and to not expect too much playing time. So CP3 attempted to be a vocal leader during his time with the team, like he's always been, but his leadership style clashed with some players and coaches and members of the front office. So according to his former Clippers teammate John Collins, actually current Clippers teammate, still on the team, according to John Collins, Paul was leading the team's second unit, routinely kicking the starters' ass in training camp. And then we shift over to start of season after the Clippers got smacked by the Jazz in their season opener. Paul attempted to bring the team together to encourage a dialogue, but it fell flat amongst the veteran players. CP3 also tried to organize a Halloween party for the team after their win over the Pelicans October 31st, but only 3 players showed up.
Chris Paul, the guy who's played all 82 games and seasons, the guy who's been a floor general for 20 years, the guy who's known for being one of the most vocal leaders in the league. They thought that guy would just chill? Several players were immediately concerned about CP taking their minutes. So Lawrence Frank, the front office guy, assured them, hey, he's going to have a small role, nothing to worry about. which is sketchy to begin with because you're basically promising your roster that this Hall of Fame point guard who just played a full season isn't going to play much. That's like signing Russell Westbrook and telling everyone, "Don't worry, he'll just sit on the bench, he'll be fine." But Chris said, okay, as long as he could compete and be an extension of the coaching staff, he was good with it. Not an ideal start, but both sides agreed to try it. Once the season actually began, things went south immediately. Every time Chris tried to suggest something, people were like, "Who the hell is this guy and why is he telling me how to do my job?" He suggested that a teammate change his training methods. The Clipper training staff felt threatened. He challenged players during practice, told them how to run plays differently. People got offended. Some people said it wasn't even the suggestions themselves, it was the delivery. The way Chris communicated made people defensive rather than receptive. One team executive said, "That's how Chris is. He wears you out. He's convinced he's right, and often he is right, which kind of pisses you off even more. Then he'll go around to everyone until you agree with him." That's a perfect description of what happened all season. Chris would make a suggestion. Someone would disagree. Chris would then lobby other players, coaches, and staff members until enough people agreed with him that the original person felt pressured to change their mind. That's exhausting to deal with, especially when you're losing games and everyone's already frustrated. Things got worse during training camp and preseason. Chris was running the second unit in practice and absolutely cooking the starters. Head coach Tyronn Lue even played Chris nearly 20 minutes in preseason games, and people started asking, what happened to the small role? That made Chris even more empowered to keep doing his thing. And that's the exact moment everything cracked. Game 1 against the Utah Jazz, the Clippers lost by 21 points. Immediately after the game, Chris tried to get everyone into a team meeting in the locker room. No one was interested. They just wanted to get out of there and process the loss individually. A few nights later, after a win over New Orleans, Chris and his wife threw a Halloween party at the arena. They brought food, decorations, everything you'd need for team bonding. 3 people showed up: Ivica Zubac, 1 other player, and maybe a staff member or 2 depending on the report. 3 people to a party thrown by a future Hall of Famer who's trying to build team chemistry. That is the saddest, most awkward thing imaginable. The rejection must have been brutal.
This team, defensively, the Thunder, from the rest of the pack, because the gap is substantial, even though Houston is terrific. What makes this defensive team so special?
They can guard at all 5 positions, no weak links on the floor, and they pressure you, they speed you up, they attack the dribble, they turn you over. And so, coming to the game, we talked about not turning the basketball over. We give up 29 turnovers for 38 points. I thought our half-court defense was really good. I thought we did a good job against them. When you turn the ball over against them, it's just too hard to recover.
After that Halloween party disaster, the Clippers didn't win another game for almost 2 weeks. Some of those losses were to Oklahoma City and Phoenix, teams that Chris had previously played for. And Chris was absolutely pissed because the coaching staff didn't even ask him for scouting reports on how to guard Devin Booker or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So you've got this disconnect, where the Clippers signed Chris thinking he'd be one thing, Chris showed up expecting to be something completely different, and neither side adjusted their expectations to match reality. The people who got most offended were actually the coaches. There was a rumor that Tyronn Lue and Chris didn't talk for weeks. The reality is they did talk, but those conversations consisted of Chris giving Lue suggestions about team meetings and practice structure, and Lue responding by benching Chris for entire games. For the first time in his entire career, Chris Paul was getting DNPs, did not plays, just sitting on the bench in street clothes watching games. That had to be humiliating for someone with his competitive drive and ego. But the other coach involved here was Jeff Van Gundy, the defensive coordinator. And if you remember Van Gundy from his broadcasting days, you know he's incredibly opinionated and not shy about expressing his views. ESPN reported that Van Gundy and Chris Paul butted heads all year long. Can you imagine those 2 personalities trying to work together? Van Gundy once said on air, "When I go to writers to tell me who can guard in this league, I'll put a gun to my own head." That's how dismissive he is of outside opinions. So when Chris started making defensive suggestions, Van Gundy was not having it. Everything finally blew up after a game against Dallas. Kawhi Leonard had just returned from injury and was playing his first game back. During the game, Chris suggested they switch their coverage on Klay Thompson because Kawhi looked a little winded. They switched, putting someone else on Thompson. It didn't work out. Now, suggesting defensive adjustments mid-game was literally Jeff Van Gundy's job as the defensive coordinator. So Van Gundy was pissed that Chris was doing his job for him. On the team plane after the game, Van Gundy confronted Chris about it. And if you know how Van Gundy talks, it probably wasn't subtle or diplomatic. He probably went right at Chris about overstepping his role. Chris got furious. He walked to the back of the plane where Chris Dunn and Kawhi Leonard were sitting, made them stand up, and asked them, "Hey, was I telling you what to do or was I making a suggestion?" And Kawhi said, "It was a suggestion." Chris turned to Van Gundy like, "See, it was a suggestion. What's wrong with that?" And that's when Van Gundy said, "Well, you don't have that leeway here anymore." That was the breaking point. Because this wasn't the first time Chris had been talked to about his behavior. Coaches had addressed it. The front office had addressed it. Tyronn Lue had given him multiple warnings. This was essentially the final straw. The Clippers decided right then and there, we don't care that we're all the way across the country on the road. We don't care that it's the middle of the night. We are sending Chris Paul home. This is too much drama for the 12th guy on the bench. Lawrence Frank, the front office executive, said he wanted to tell Chris in person rather than over the phone or through intermediaries. So he arranged a meeting. But because of various logistical reasons, that meeting didn't happen until almost 3 a.m. Chris was stunned. He didn't see this coming despite all the warnings and conversations. And true to form, he brought someone else into the room, reportedly another veteran player, to try to back him up and convince the front office they were making a mistake. That's apparently what Chris does. Whenever someone disagrees with him, he immediately gets other people involved to tell you why you're wrong and he's right. It's the same pattern that happened all season, but the decision was already made. The Clippers told him, "Look, you're going home, but you're a legend here. We're going to retire your jersey someday. Do you want to put out a joint statement saying we mutually agreed on this?" And Chris said, "Hell no." He stormed out of the meeting and immediately posted on Instagram that he'd been sent home by the team. So the reports were true. It wasn't one big incident. It was months of small things building up. The training staff feeling undermined, players feeling micromanaged, coaches feeling disrespected, until that final confrontation on the plane between Chris and Jeff Van Gundy.
Very happy. This is great.
Here's the thing, though. The Clippers absolutely messed up here, too. They knew what Chris Paul's leadership style was. Everyone in the NBA knows how Chris operates. He's been the same way his entire career. And they signed him anyway, thinking somehow he'd be different at age 41. You can't sign Chris Paul and expect him to not be Chris Paul. That's who he is. His intensity and attention to detail is what made him great. It's also what makes him difficult to play with sometimes. And putting him on a veteran team full of established stars with veteran coaches who don't want or need his input, that was never going to work. Once the team started losing games, the environment became toxic because everyone was frustrated, and Chris was trying to fix things in ways that made people more frustrated. One comment on the original ESPN story said it perfectly. Throughout his career, Chris Paul has graded on veterans, but been a good leader for young players. He probably came off as very patronizing and micromanaging to the vets, but to young guys, that comes off as a leader who's focused on details. That's exactly right. When Chris was in Oklahoma City with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a young roster, everyone praised his leadership. In Phoenix, with Devin Booker and young players, same thing. But on veteran teams, it doesn't work. At 41 years old, Chris can't lead primarily through his on-court play anymore. He's not dominating games and earning respect through performance. So when he tries to lead through coaching and suggestions, veterans who've been all-stars themselves don't want to hear it. The irony here is that Chris's old team, the San Antonio Spurs, are way ahead of schedule in their rebuild, just like Phoenix after he left, and Oklahoma City. and Houston. Every team Chris plays for seems to take off after he's gone. That's not necessarily Chris's fault. It's more about timing. Those teams develop young players while Chris is there, then those players hit their prime right after he leaves. But it's still a weird pattern. The Clippers situation was doomed from the start, though. You had a veteran team that didn't want or need the kind of leadership Chris provides. You had coaches who felt undermined by his constant suggestions. You had a front office that promised him one role, but the competitive reality of who Chris is made that impossible. And once they started losing, everyone's worst tendencies came out. Chris became more intense and demanding. Players became more resistant. Coaches became more defensive. The front office became more regretful about the signing. The Halloween party where 3 people showed up might be the saddest detail in the whole story. Chris was genuinely trying to build team chemistry and bonding, and basically the entire team said, "Nah, we're good." That rejection probably hurt more than any of the basketball stuff. By the time they sent Chris home at 3 a.m. in a hotel room across the country, both sides knew it was over. They couldn't work together. The chemistry was destroyed. The role never materialized as planned. Chris wanted to be a vocal leader, making suggestions and helping the team succeed. The Clippers wanted a quiet veteran who'd be there when needed, but otherwise stay out of the way. Those two visions were incompatible from day one. And honestly, neither side is entirely wrong here. Chris's leadership style has helped teams before. The Clippers' desire for a low-maintenance veteran presence makes sense for their roster construction. They just weren't compatible with each other. If this breakdown helped you understand what really happened, smash that like button and subscribe for more NBA Deep analysis.